guess my first experience with personal computers was, I am a military retiree, and I want to think maybe in the early 80s we started getting personal computers, and my first experience with them was that they were so foreign. I have to understand that at that time I was in 1986 I was 30 years old, so I had spent all of my young adult life not having computers, and all of a sudden they became this essential part of our lives. Everything that we were doing, all the reports, all the stuff that we had to do in the military was all of a sudden on computers, and I had to learn all these new programs, and it was quite a transition, learning how to use computers. Well, at that time, I was what they call a squadron commander. I was a person who was in charge of about 300 people who were in the military. And all of their records, their personnel records, their pay records, discipline, everything that we did with people became computerized. It had been the records had been kept on paper and put in the file cabinets. And now all of a sudden they were going to be on computers. And I had to learn how to do all that. I had to learn how to operate the programs that they provided for us. But I didn't have any experience with it, so it was quite an ordeal. My first experiences with personal computers were at work. I had no way of knowing of how big computers were going to become. I did not foresee the internet, for example, and of course it's just so part of our basic life right now is the internet, and I wasn't smart enough, didn't have enough foresight to realize how big it was going to become. Everybody, from the time I went to college in the 70s, and in the 70s everybody was talking about how big computers were going to be in our lives, and there were a few articles that I read about how big computers, but you didn't, it just didn't register. It's like, I guess right now a good example is everybody is talking about how big these printers, plastic printers, what do they call it? 3D printers are going to be in the future. Do you understand how big 3D printers are going to be in your life in the future? I guess they're going to be huge, but you haven't seen it yet. And so it's hard to relate. And that's the way it was with personal computers back in the 70s and the 80s. Everybody was talking about how much of an impact they were going to have, but we hadn't seen it yet. And obviously they are now an essential part of our lives. Everything has changed. Everything has changed. I remember getting my first portable phone probably in the early 90s because again, work gave it to me and said, you have to carry this phone around. It was this great big honking thing, phone that you carried around, and I was like, oh. And now actually, smartphones do everything. GPS, weather, everything is on smartphones, and I had no idea that this was going to happen. I sort of resent them. I was talking to my cousin about this. I spent the first 40 years of my life without a phone, and now all of a sudden everybody's got to have one. If you don't have a phone, you're not connected. So it's and we did just fine for 40 years without them. And now all of a sudden you got to have them. So it's sort of, I resent them a little bit.